Hi, I'm Mike Bush.
I'm Paul New.
And I'm Colleen Sterling. Welcome to Ask the A&Ps by AOPA.
Ask the A&Ps is the show where we try to answer your toughest maintenance questions. And so if you have a question, email us at podcasts@aopa.org for a chance to get on the show.
Please follow or subscribe to be alerted when a new show comes out.
And if you'd like to get on our mailing list, if you're in North America, the easiest way to do that is to text the word SAVVY, S-A-V-V-Y, to 33777, and you can just get on our list with your smartphone. That's text the word SAVVY, S-A-V-V-Y, to 33777. If you're not in North America, that doesn't work. So if you're in Europe or something, you can go to the savvyaviation.com website and click on the link at the top of the page to get on the list.
It's good to see you guys again.
I'm back from a long journey.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, traveled to Antarctica and back successfully.
You're not going to show us any penguins?
No, I've seen way too many penguins.
I'm telling you, in the pictures you sent, mostly what I saw was cold. That just looked cold.
It's still cold down there. It's not completely melted away. But all joking aside, highly recommend it if you can ever make it. It's a fabulous trip. Beautiful place.
It looked pretty amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Especially the staff to guest ratio on your ship.
Yeah. We were pretty pampered. I think we're sold on elite cruises.
There you go.
Might do it again.
Well, I had an interesting exchange with an STC holder who was concerned that he had identified a goodly number of 337 forms where people had used his STC to modify an aircraft without authorization. And the FARs require that you get authorization from an STC holder before you're allowed to use the STC. So he prepared a list of tail numbers that had used his STC without permission. And he went to his local FSDO, and they basically blew him off. And they said that, that's a civil matter. It's not something the FAA gets involved in. So he came to me and asked me what my opinion on all of that was. And we started digging into the regulations, and it got kind of interesting. There's a regulation. It's 91403D that says no person may alter an aircraft, in accordance with an STC without getting permission from the STC holder. That's not exactly what it says, but that's the essence of what it says. So then the question is, well, what does that reg mean? No person may alter. So is that a reg that where the burden of compliance is on the mechanic, the person who is altering, or is it the burden on the aircraft owner?
Well, it's in Part 91.
So yeah, you could say, well, it's in Part 91. Part 91 speaks to aircraft owners. It really should be against the aircraft owner, but
they don't know.
But that's not exactly what the reg says. It says no person may alter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So can a mechanic get busted for altering an aircraft in accordance with an STC where no permission has been granted? Is this a regulation where the burden falls on mechanics, or is it one where the burden falls on owners or both. It's really really undefined. I did a search of legal interpretations, and there was only one legal interpretation regarding 91403D, and it shed no light whatsoever on this particular subject. So, as far as I know, this has never been posed to the Office of Chief Counsel to find out exactly what this reg means. Now, it turns out that 91403D was enacted in order to comply with, it was enacted in 2006, by the way. Prior to 2006, there was no requirement to get permission in the regs. But it was added to the regs in order to comply with a change to 49 USC something or other that actually came out in 1998. And that change to the United States Code read differently than what the reg reads. It says, no person may request an aircraft to be altered without permission, which makes it clear that was the owner. The owner is the person who requests the alteration, but he's not the one that makes the alteration.
That's a strange way to state that.
So it is very odd. But then the real threshold question is this: suppose an aircraft is altered in accordance with what this particular STC holder was referring to as a pirated copy of an STC, the one that didn't have permission. Does that mean that the aircraft is unairworthy?
Unairworthy, yeah. I knew
I took a poll of we've got 30 some odd IAs on the Savvy staff, and so we took a poll about how our IAs when they're acting in their capacity as IAs, how they interpret what this stuff means. And the consensus was that they would make sure that permission was granted before they would make the alteration. Mm-hmm. But none of them would verify at each annual inspection of an aircraft that all of the STCs that were made on that aircraft had permission. So they interpreted that they had a burden to comply at the time of the alteration, but not at the time that they're making annual airworthiness determination.
They're willing to look the other way, is what you're saying.
No.
Well, no.
The
question is, again, it's a question of what does this regulation actually mean? And now the question comes down to, well, what does airworthy mean? Airworthy means that the aircraft complies with its original or properly altered type design and is in condition for safe operation. So is an aircraft that is modified in accordance with a pirated copy of an STC where the alteration was scrupulously done in accordance with approved data, it's just that they didn't have permission to use it, is that properly altered or not?
It's just a matter of who's not getting paid. The airplane is properly altered. It's just that the guy isn't getting compensated.
Well, the FISCO's interpretation, and actually my initial interpretation before I started digging into this and discovering this is a quagmire, was that this is simply an intellectual property dispute between the STC holder and the owner, and it is a civil matter, and the FAA shouldn't be involved in it. Mm-hmm. But I started digging around in there, and it became clear as mud, because the reg says one thing and the U.S. code says another thing, and neither of them say anything about airworthiness, whether failure to. So, if the aircraft is airworthy because it was altered in accordance with approved data, the data was was obtained illicitly, but it was still approved data. Is the aircraft airworthy or not? And if it is airworthy, then what is the penalty on an aircraft owner who does that? Is that something that the FAA should be involved in, or is that something that lawyers should settle in civil court?
Can I make it worse?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So I'm not sure exactly when it occurred that the STC holders would send with the STC a letter of permission. It was not always that way.
2006 is when the reg became effective.
That's when the reg became.
And it was 1998 when it changed to the U.S. code.
Right. So back in the day, you would be an STC holder. There was no permission required.
Right.
And I get calls, and I have seen aircraft that would install an STC that they moved from one airplane to another. They would find a wrecked airplane, get the parts off the wrecked airplane, and put this system on a newer. I got a call about this 3 weeks ago, and I'll leave out the details, but someone had an aircraft that had an engine conversion that had been paid for. That airplane got destroyed. They wanted to move that conversion now to a different airplane and assumed that since they had paid for this STC once, they now did not have to pay for it again. And it's on a whole different airplane. And this STC occurred, it was granted in 2012 or something like that. So it definitely falls under somebody's got to have permission. But in the old airplanes, a lot of the STs don't even exist, or in the old STCs. So when we do an annual inspection, IAs in general, most of the STCs that we see, we have seen before. So we look at them and we're looking to see if it's been installed correctly. We look to see that there is documentation, a 337 form saying that it was installed. I would say I never look for a permission slip or the letter of permission.
Yeah, that's what the consensus of all of our guys was, that nobody does that at annual.
And when I perform an STC, what I send to the FAA, and this is kind of a little muddy as well, I will send the 337, I will send a copy of the cover sheet for the STC, and I will send a permission sheet. I don't send all the installation document and all that. To me, that's just nuts to include all that in a 337.
You're talking about what you file with Oak City?
What I file with Oak City. So it's basically just 3 pages. And I describe, because all the instructions for the installation are part of the STC. So I describe that by reference, installed in accordance with. Boom. It's real simple.
It is simple. Yeah.
Now, if you didn't send the permission letter to Oak City, they wouldn't care, right?
They wouldn't care. Oak City didn't care about that. I only send it because it seems like it should be documented somewhere that permission slip existed, in addition to it being in the aircraft paperwork. It does seem like that's a civil matter, but I am curious that, so now we have the old STCs and the new ones, and there's no life limit on the ownership of the STC. It's not a patent. So I assume it just goes on in perpetually. How did this STC holder find out how many about these airplanes that this had been done? How did he research that?
I don't know.
Yeah,
that's fascinating.
That's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. I don't know how that would have happened.
It's not in public record, so.
Well, this STC holder, who I'm not going to identify, his STCs are in a relatively small community.
Okay.
So figuring this out probably was not beyond the realm of practicality. It's not
It is very frustrating. I can imagine for an STC holder, because especially simple STCs, where you can just nab a pair of sun visors off of somebody else's airplane and stick them on yours and say installed per the STC. And more complicated ones, speed brakes or gap seals or something like that. Gap seals is one that used to come up a lot in our shop, and it is intellectual. Someone spent a huge amount of time
Convincing
and
the
effort
FAA.
and cost getting an STC.
Sure.
For
And
sure.
I'm working on one as we speak related to batteries. And I'm looking ahead at what is this going to take? And dealing with the FAA, not that that's a terrible thing, but it's an arduous task. And people that go through that, they've earned it.
Mhm.
And
So I have to ask the question. So George Braley has an STC for his G1000 fuel, right?
Mhm.
Do you have to modify the aircraft at all? Maybe placard it?
Yes, you have to placard it.
So what's to prevent me from just putting that stuff in my tank and going and I burn it and nobody's going to know I even had it in there, right?
not a thing.
So George put a lot of money into getting this fuel certified, and he's just trying to recoup some of his costs, I'm sure. And I'm wondering how many people are just going to blow that off, right?
Well, I don't think George is depending on STC revenue as a significant part of this, because he's going to make money on every gallon of G100 UL that's
Why
sold.
does he even have an STC? Is it
Because that's the only way he could get the fuel approved. Because there were two possible ways of getting the fuel approved. One was the STC route, and one was getting an ASTM to come up with a standard that covered it. And the ASTM was highly political, and it was very clear that they were never going to do that. So the Swift Fuels went the ASTM route. George went the STC route.
So you're saying the FAA does care if I have the STC for this aircraft, and they will do an enforcement against me if they see me putting it in my tank without?
They're not caring whether you paid money. They're caring whether you have the STC.
I'm not aware of any case where the FAA brought an enforcement action against somebody for installing an STC without permission.
There might be some really obscure something where an aircraft accident occurred related to maybe an improperly installed STC and then lawsuits, but that still doesn't involve the FAA.
I'm just talking about the fuel. I mean, it's going to prevent people from just using the fuel.
Nothing. And I don't think George is losing any sleep over that.
Yeah. All right. Just an extreme example, because there's no mod required for the airplane.
No, he would have much rather gotten that fuel approved without having to get the STC, but that's the only way that he could practically get it approved. So.
Our first question is from Dennis, whose prop is taunting him. Go ahead, Dennis.
I love it.
Hey guys, love the podcast. I've got a 1975 Cardinal RG. I think, Colin, you're pretty familiar with those. And it's got the stock, Macaulay prop on it, the controllable prop. And I'm having a problem with underspeed on it. And every time I look up, prop control issues, it's overspeed, and this is an underspeed issue. And what happens is when the engine gets warm, it won't make RPM anymore. So, when the engine's cold and I go to take off, it goes right to 2,700. Governor holds it just fine. But if I'm doing some touch and goes or something like that, or I stop to get fuel on takeoff, I might only get 2,650. I might only get 2,620. And so I sent the governor. The governor had been, I ran a couple 100 hours before I got it. I sent it out, had it checked out again. They couldn't find anything wrong. Had it IRAN'd by another shop. They couldn't find anything wrong. They changed the speeder spring because they thought that might be the issue. Still no joy. And finally, I just gave up and put an overhauled governor on it. And it still happened. And we just couldn't seem to figure it out. And the shops kept telling me that, well, you need to overhaul your prop. But the prop, it doesn't leak. There's no tip wobble.
And they couldn't tell you why.
Yeah, they couldn't tell me why. And I've been listening to Mike for a long time now, maybe a little too long. I don't know. And, I'm like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Right. There's nothing.
Well,
props,
and
yeah.
prop shops are like Roach Motel.
Yeah. So,
Roach motels.
Props check in, but they never check out.
yeah.
Love it.
So, I was just kind of deathly afraid of sending this thing in without sort of a definitive reason. And so finally at Oshkosh last year, I went into Macaulay booth and I talked to one of the tech reps, and of course he says, well, you need to send your prop in. And of course, okay. And then he gave me the actual first reason I've heard, a good reason I've heard why. He said there's a spring in there. And so, of course, the governor, in order to bring the RPM down, the governor is putting out oil pressure, and that's what changes the pitch of your prop, actually brings your RPM down. That spring pushes back against that. And he said those springs can sort of take a set and sort of weaken over time. And what's happening is because I've got these Iran governors and overhauled governors, they cannot, they're putting out a good load of oil, and they cannot actually cut the pressure enough to let that spring put the prop into high pitch. So he suggested, nope, send your prop in and get the spring replaced. So that actually made sense to me. So I guess the questions I had for you guys is, first of all, have you heard of this before? Because I can't seem to find any reference. I've never heard of this before. And second of all, I am an A&P IA. I do have the Macaulay manual. Is this something that I can do in the field, or is it sheer lunacy to crack into my propeller that doesn't have to go into a shop?
You can't open it.
Well, you can't do it legally, and you can't do it practically because it requires a special tool. That spring, when the spring is decompressed, it's about 6 feet long. It's a huge thing.
6 feet.
And they have this tool. It consists of a very long threaded rod that they use to gracefully
Wind it up.
to decompress it and then recompress it when it goes back together.
So do springs really take sets? I've never heard that before.
I've never heard that either.
I mean,
it's sort of semi-plausible, I suppose.
Yeah.
But
you think of the temperature of the spring changes, so it's, I don't know if you call it elasticity.
Cool.
It's not that
Well,
much.
cold versus hot. That's what I'm saying.
I mean, it can't be running any hotter than oil temperature, and oil temperature never
Doesn't
gets
seem
more
like a
than
huge
about
range in
200 degrees.
I'm just thinking in terms of its initial temperature versus its oil-induced temperature. There is a difference, which may change how the spring responds. Don't know. I haven't thought through that. But at the risk of exposure, or not exposure, anyway, my airplane does the same thing.
Okay.
My airplane does the same thing too. So, yeah. And what I did is turned up the governor a little bit.
Yeah, and I did that, but I guess then the problem I have is I'm on a cold takeoff, I'm overspeeding slightly, and I know Lycoming does allow you a little bit of an overspeed, and I can just reach down with the prop lever and cut it back a little bit, but
it's
yeah, and it just sort of annoys me. Let's just put it that way.
Isn't the rule that anything less than a 5% overspeed is pretty much a non-event?
And I verified that by talking to shops.
And a 5% overspeed is
it's really no big deal. Of course, my JPM
150 RPM or something.
Flashing, but it's really no big deal to go to 20 or even 30 RPM over on our airplanes. So I've tried not to worry about it. My prop also surges, and you mentioned that as well in your write-up, and I would love to figure out what's causing the surging because it never used to do that.
The surging, because I see this a lot on the Cirrus, the 22Ts, where the prop governor is fixed at 2,500. And if the airplane's been sitting for a bit, like a couple of days, that first throttle up, you have to be really slow on the last bit of throttle up because the prop is it's hunting. And the prop governor, think, They haven't changed much in a really long time. It's all mechanical. There's no closed loop electronic system that's monitoring the RPM and making all these little fine adjustments for you. And if you have to give that prop governor a chance, not only for the speeder spring, the flyweights to reposition, the valve moves, then the oil goes through the crankshaft, then it gets to the prop. All this stuff takes time to occur. If you want to know, this drove my dad nuts. The first time we got a digital tachometer on an airplane, this is a really long time ago. It was one of those, the P1000 or the H1000. Horizon made it.
Horizon, yep.
Yeah. And it included that last digit of the RPM. And in steady flight, that last digit moves all the time. Well, those things, they were the most phenomenal tachometers ever because they didn't measure RPM, they counted RPM, which is way better than measuring anything. If you can count it, it's better than measuring it. And so it was very accurate, but you always had this number that was changing. And that's when I realized, that RPM is moving up and down, plus or minus 10 RPM. And I thought, well, that's some inaccuracy or something. But the truth is, a lot of it has to do with the airplane moving up and down and the prop governor continually trying to manage that RPM. And there's this lag in that effort. And you'll notice all the new the RPM displays blank off that last digit to a 0. And if you have analog tachometer, the needle width is 50 RPM. Yeah, so you never saw it. But nothing changed. You just now see it.
I can hear it and feel it.
Oh, that's a lot.
I didn't used to. Now, I did look up a little bit. It does depend what kind of governor you have. And Dennis, you didn't mention, was it a Macaulay governor?
I have a Macaulay governor, and mine only does it when it's warm. So I know it's pretty common to get surging when they're cold.
Yeah.
All the reasons Paul just outlined, but mine, when it's cold, it's rock solid. It's when it gets warm that I get that surging, and only when I'm trying to get max RPM. When I cut it back to cruise, man, it holds 24, 25, wherever I set it. It'll hold it pretty rock solid.
I wonder if it's fighting between the prop governor and the low pitch stops.
Yeah.
Like a harmonic?
No, not a harmonic, but you're right on that edge of you're using the low pitch stops, and then the prop governor is saying, unfortunately, it's a minor adjustment to increase the pitch, but it's just kind of back and forth.
But on a Macaulay, you can't adjust the stop in the field the way you can
only on the Hartzell.
On a Hartzell.
Right? Oh, okay.
Yeah, and actually my stops, I want to say they're probably at like 2680, because when you do a static run up, it'll go to that RPM, and then you can actually tell when it comes off the stops.
Sure.
And when it's warm, when it comes off the stops, it actually drags the RPM down, which is really kind of weird.
There was a service letter that came, I read about this right before the podcast, that came out on the Macaulay governor, something about the flyweight assembly, but it came out in 2002. And if you've had yours overhauled multiple times recently, it seems like they should be complying with that. But it would cause surging in the governor. So that's, and that service letter's on the CFO site if you look in the tech section.
Yeah, and there was another service letter in 2018 that was also had to do with the flyweights and the speeder spring that was also complied with. So, the Macaulay tech rep said the surging was the result of sort of it bouncing off of that spring. So the governor is trying to cut back, the spring pushes, and the governor, lets a little oil out and it pushes back. And it was just sort of setting up a back and forth. They described it as a bouncing, which again kind of made sense, other than this is the first time I've ever heard it.
Yeah.
Wait, so they're giving you an explanation of a problem they haven't heard before?
Well, he seemed to think he said he had heard of it before.
Okay.
But I can find no reference of it anywhere else. In my day job, I work for an OEM. I ought to believe the OEMs, but
hey, I got an idea. Let's just blank off one more digit off that tag.
There you go.
Well, and I do have a Horizon like Paul, and I have an 830, a JPI 830, and I did notice, yes, that when I get tired of looking at those digits on the horizon, I just move my scan up, and that solves a lot of my issues.
A little piece of tape right
Yes.
over that one spot, I think would just be marvelous.
Yeah.
My prop never used to surge, and after I overhauled my engine, I think I sent the governor and the prop out for overhaul at the same time, and now it's
That's what
surging.
did it.
Oh, didn't we tell you not to do that?
I am guilty of saying, well, it's not hurting anything. I'm just going to live with it. But something's different, and it would be really nice to know. And it might be, like you're saying, the prop's okay, the governor's okay, the engine's okay. But when you put them all together, they
Right.
start fighting each other. And who's going to take ownership for that and kind of fix it? The prop guys are going to point to the governor guys, the governor's going to point to the prop. And you're left with somebody who's got to be brilliant to kind of like figure it all out. It's a really hard thing when you have interfaces between systems on an airplane, appliances on the engine, and there's no real clear instruction about how they're supposed to work together, So I've just chosen to live with it and deal with other problems. But I think it's going to be really hard. I would vote not to send your prop in because, like Mike says, as soon as your prop goes in, everything's got to be replaced. There's corrosion on the bearings, and you're in for a big ticket. And as long as it's working within acceptable bounds, I would just live with it myself.
Yeah, and the problem is I have another airplane, an RV-8, that has an IO390 engine with an aero composite prop, which is no longer made, but they used a Macaulay hub.
I've got one of those.
Yep.
My Lancer. Yep.
Okay. And it does the same thing. So I can't even escape it by going to fly my other airplane. No matter which airplane I fly, I have the same
Both of
problem.
your airplanes do the same thing, then it has to be normal. Just
That's it.
At least
I
you
like
know
that.
what you got. You're used to it. But yeah, that's frustrating. And mine doesn't do it. So again, I think it's the installation. I think it's how the systems play with each other.
The combination. Okay.
we're using 2010 instrumentation on 1940 design
Totally agree.
hardware.
Yeah, I really-
Here's the solution. Take out that P1000. Go get an old analog tack. By the way, it's inaccurate by at least 100 RPM. It's going to read 100 RPM low. So get you a little sticker that you put on this, right next
Correction
to it.
card.
Handwritten, a little correction card. And then once in a blue moon in cruise, you take your digital tachometer that you have Velcroed on the dash and you read what that says and compare it, and you will be happy.
There you go.
I don't know. He won't be.
And a good pair of A&R headsets so you don't hear any of
So
this.
you don't hear it.
I want to know what's wrong, but I think I don't have enough brain cells to do this one, so I'm moving on to other issues.
Or
But
money.
It's frustrating. I was hoping Mike or Paul would have some other
And
ideas.
your Lancer is an experimental, so we could go take your prop apart if we wanted to, right?
Well, unfortunately, the Air Composites prop just came off this past weekend, and I'm putting on a Whirlwind prop. So but I never had a problem with the Air Composites prop. It was just slow for racing. So, and it's unsupported. So if you ever have a problem with it, you're kind of SOL finding parts or somebody to overhaul it. So I'm going to a Whirlwind since I'm on the same airport as Whirlwind.
Yeah.
It makes it easy.
Oh, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was half tempted to sort of, maybe try changing the spring on my RV-8 because it is experimental and
No, don't do it.
okay.
It is big.
Toing.
Yeah.
No, you could probably go down to Home Depot and get a long length of threaded rod and make
I
up
wouldn't mess
a
with my
jig
prop.
for doing that.
No.
Well, if you want to know what's going to happen when you take it apart, go watch Roadrunner. And in one of those episodes, you'll see exactly what's going to happen.
It's usually the coyote that gets it. So.
The coyote, he is your guy.
Yeah.
That'll be you. Don't do it.
Well,
Well, I appreciate it, guys. This one, I've been living with it for about 3 years now, and I guess I'm going to have to live with it a little longer. But it's not the end of the world.
if
It
we do
is not.
figure out what's
Well,
wrong, I'll post it to CFO and we can all talk.
But it would be
Yeah.
okay to crank up the speed a little bit so you're a few percent over when on a cold takeoff and then you wouldn't
And
be
then
as
just-
far under on a worm
And then
takeoff.
just moderate it yourself.
Yeah, I'm not going to admit to have doing that on a public forum, but
Right.
in theory that might have resolved the issue.
Solution in the past, yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Roger that.
Good
All right,
question,
well,
Dennis.
It's great to meet you, Dennis, and love the airplane, right?
Yeah, it's a
Never sell my
fantastic
airplane.
plane.
Yeah,
So
really is. So
great,
okay.
thanks guys. I really appreciate the help.
Okay.
All right, Dennis.
All right, good luck. Take care.
So our next question is from Luis, who is thinking about recurrency in the A&P world, which is a kind of a thing we don't ever think about like pilots do. But go ahead, Luis. Let us know what's going on.
Well, thanks for having me on the show, guys. Mike, you're inspiring me to get my own airplane, making it look like it's more affordable than I initially thought. So I really, really thank you and the podcast. All right, so real quick, I got my A&P in high school in New York City, and then I went to college, went to join the Air Force, flew airplanes. I'm still flying airplanes, and I'm approaching my retirement time with the Air Force and looking to buy my own airplane. But I've noticed that I am not current on being an A&P. So I want to save money and do some of the maintenance myself, but I don't know how I can reestablish currency on wrenching.
So have you looked up the regulations?
I have.
They require.
It says, what do I have here? I wrote it down here.
We looked it up as well. So.
Yes. My question is, how does the administrator determine that I have done the work for the past 6 months at a shop under supervision of an A&P? Does that mean I have to volunteer my time and work freelance? Or is that freelance work for free at a shop? I guess that's the question.
Well,
how do I
that's
log time?
That's not what the reg says, is it?
No.
It says it has to be acceptable to the administrator.
Well,
Time you log.
that part, there are two clauses in the reg. Did somebody have the reg up? Come on, one of
I don't
you.
know it. Jeez. Three of you?
65, 80, or 80
81?
something.
Yeah.
But there's something that says you either have to have satisfied the administrator that you know what you're doing, which I think is that clause is in there so that a freshly minted A&P who just got his certificate and obviously hasn't been exercising the privileges of his certificate for 6 months gets to be able to do it, right? Mm-hmm. That's what that clause is for. But the other clause is that you have to have, what does it say? It says you have to have exercised the privilege.
I'm pulling it up here. We'll read it verbatim here.
Ian's got it.
Oh, does Ian have it? Oh, gosh. That's exactly how it looks like on my screen, too.
You have to be supervised or served as a mechanic or technically supervised other mechanics for 6 months.
So my question would be initially on A, the administrator has found that I am able to do the work. How do I prove that?
Well, you have an A&P. So you're certificated, and I think that's sufficient in part. So you're certificated and you're certificated and qualified, and then actually have the experience doing it. So I don't know. Have you ever changed a tire on an airplane? And I don't mean that
20 years ago at A&P, when I was going through high school,
Not
but that
in
was
the last.
it still counts.
not in the last 24 months.
It does. No. It doesn't say that within the last 24 months, you have to have changed a tire to be current on changing tires. You have to, as a mechanic, if I changed a tire, I got my A&P, I don't know however many decades ago I got it, and I changed the tire under the supervision of a mechanic that had changed the tire before, and he obviously did it under some other mechanic that had changed the tire. So then I am current for changing a tire. There isn't a time frame in which that me changing a tire runs out. So it's not saying that you have to go back and perform all of these individual tasks again. Now, if you're going to do a task that you've never done before, then yeah, you have to have supervision for that. What I would say to be current, if you're going to buy an airplane, you may as well get current on your airplane. So perform a task, find an A&P somewhere that will come by and check your work. They don't have to physically be standing there when you do the work to supervise the work. Matter of fact, I think these days you could even make a good argument for a video call for someone to look at the work you're doing, and chalk that up for your recurrency, or it's not even, do we want to call it currency? I guess it is. It's recent experience. It's not really currency.
Paul, let me ask a question. If Luis swung wrenches on his airplane for 6 months, doing stuff that he's allowed to do under his preventive maintenance authority.
Oh, yeah.
Does that work count towards the currency?
Yeah, as a mechanic, when I change a tire, which is preventive maintenance,
Right.
it's considered maintenance.
Yeah.
Not considered, but I mean, I write it up as maintenance.
But Lewis is allowed to change a tire even if he's not
Absolutely.
current, because
That's right.
he's doing it under his preventive maintenance authority.
Yeah.
He's allowed to
Change the oil.
change spark plugs and
All that
change
stuff.
the oil and all of the other stuff that
Absolutely.
owners are allowed to do under their preventive maintenance authority. So does that stuff count as currency?
Sure. I don't see anywhere.
So you could get recurrent that way
Yeah.
without any supervision, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then if there were things that you needed to do that you've never done before and you're not really sure, of course you would look for somebody to guide you
Absolutely.
through that when you did it. But you'd be legal. Just get, guidance.
But I mean, that reg that says that an A&P is not supposed to do something he's never done before except under supervision.
That's a whole different thing.
That reg, nobody ever pays attention to.
Well,
Until something goes wrong.
I do.
I remember years ago I stopped by Phil Kirkham's shop, and one of the mechanics there had his head buried in the nose of a Cessna Crusader.
Oh gosh, 303.
There weren't a lot of those built, and so he's messing with the landing gear, and just to tweak him, I said, I said, have you ever worked on the landing gear of a Crusader before? And he said, no. I said, well, aren't you supposed to be getting supervised? He said, well, I've worked on landing gears before, so, and that sort of raised the question, what the heck does that reg mean?
I think.
What does a task that you've never done before mean? Is it make and model specific? Is it very generic? Nobody knows. And I don't think anybody's ever asked the question.
That's been asked often. And here's how it's usually asked. Well, I've changed a tire on a 747. Can I now change a tire on a 150? Yeah. Well, it's not the same, but it's changing a tire. What do they have to do with each other? Not much. I mean, that's really, really different. And I think the FAA is purposely vague on maintenance stuff. They're really specific on pilot stuff, but they're really vague on, now I'm not saying vague as in they don't address it, but the way they address it leaves so much wiggle room that way, I don't know if that's for their benefit or your benefit, but by golly, the regulations are your friend. Use them wisely.
I definitely see that there's a lot of gray, and to operate in the gray is, I won't say that's the way we operate in the military, but definitely there's bounds, right? And left and right, and somewhere in the middle. And if it works, it works.
Yeah. The FAA will use terms in their regulations. And I just went through a week-long class with the AEA in Lee Summit, Missouri. And it was phenomenal. It was a master's class on regulations. And it was wonderful because so many of the things that we talk about and Mike talks about, all this works out. But the one that came up was the difference between acceptable to the administrator and accepted by the administrator. That's huge. Two very, very different things. So if you think something is probably okay, then you would say, well, that's probably acceptable to the administrator, but you don't have to wait for the administrator to accept it.
Mhm.
You send it in on the belief, due to your knowledge, that will be acceptable to the administrator. Accepted by the administrator implies that you're waiting for a return answer. Anyway, that's a small thing, but read the regulations. We had a whole discussion not long ago about washing the airplanes, whether that was part of the Appendix D in CFR 43. And, all my life, I'd always said wash the airplane, but that is not the word that they use.
Clean.
It's
required
clean.
for the annual inspection.
For the annual inspection, line item number 1 says the airplane must be cleaned. And the implication is for the purpose of the inspection. Doesn't mean you have to wash the whole airplane and vacuum the carpets and polish the windows. So
Dealerships do that. Come on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question that I'm looking here in paragraph B, it says he has, of course, they have to get rid of the he part. They've got a big program to get rid of all the gender stuff. But anyway, so he has for at least 6 months. And I would assume that they mean 6 months working full time, but they're not real specific.
Yeah, I don't think that it means that.
No, but that's the way it seems to read when I look at it, that he has for at least 6 months served as. So is that part-time, full-time? I wouldn't worry about it. I would do maintenance on the airplane that you're going to buy, record what you've done, like Mike was saying, preventive maintenance. If you do something you've never done before, get it checked. I think that's a great way to go about it.
Don't dive into an engine change, maybe.
Yeah, or an overhaul. Let's don't change the cylinder right off the bat.
Yeah, but
That sounds reasonable. So just to be clear, so there's nothing that I need to log, just the fact that I'm logging in the logbook saying, hey, I performed this on this day, and that starts my clock. And then 6 months later, I should be GTG.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to come check.
Okay, just
they're not.
The only time that they're going to come check
is when you crash the plane.
If there's an accident.
Yeah, don't do that and you're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's always if there's money involved. Insurance.
Don't wreck the airplane.
So what airplane are you buying?
I want to find. I'm looking for a V-tail Bonanza.
Okay. They're out there.
Yeah,
they are. But prices have gone up, and now I'm just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
I have a follow-up question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
So listening to Mike,
we don't charge extra
podcasts.
for follow-up questions.
Thank you, appreciate it. Let's say I did have an airplane that went into annual, and the IA turned around and said, "Hey, I'm not going to sign it off as airworthy. I'm going to sign it off as non-airworthy with discrepancies." Could I, as an A&P, as long as it's not something, but let's say he signs it off non-airworthy for discrepancies because he doesn't like the fact that it's I'm past TVO. I can go ahead and say, hey, I can sign it off after the fact and say, hey, this Part 91 doesn't require TBO. I'm good to go as an A&P.
Sure. Yep. Yeah.
Probably the best way to handle that situation after he signs it off with a discrepancy on the engine would be for you to simply perform a 100-hour inspection on the engine and declare it airworthy.
Yeah. So not just pencil whip it, actually say,
absolutely no.
Engine. It's cool.
But as an A&P,
yep.
I don't need an IA. As an A&P, I can do that on my own airplane.
Yeah. It's a 43.9 entry.
Discrepancy. Yeah.
Once you get the sign off for an annual, it's a binary choice. It passes or it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter. Everything after that is now a 43.9, which an A&P can do, or an owner can do, depending on what it is.
Sure.
So yeah, absolutely. And you don't have to have a sign off that says the airplane is now airworthy.
Yeah.
If you have a list of 10 things, once you satisfied all 10 things, it's just a standard 43.9 entry. And now the airplane is airworthy because you satisfied the 10 items that were on the list.
But if the IA says he's not going to sign off your annual because the engine's over TBO, you should say, fine, I can clear that discrepancy. But by the way, Who's your principal maintenance inspector?
Yeah. And make him put it in writing. If they're
And he
going to
might-
say something like that, you want it in writing.
Well, he has to do it in writing.
Yeah.
That's a
To sign
discrepancy.
off on any of the discrepancies, he has to have a signed and dated list of discrepancies.
He won't want to.
No, I don't think so.
Yeah. He'll
Awesome.
say, the final deal will be, well, I'll let it go this time.
Yeah.
And then don't come back.
But don't bring
Don't
it back
come
next
back.
year. And your answer is, don't worry.
Don't worry. I won't.
That's what I was thinking. Thanks for the confirmation. I do appreciate it.
But this over TBO thing, it's always a good idea to have that conversation with your IA before he starts the annual.
Yeah.
I said, this, the airplane's 300 hours over TBO. Do you have a problem with that?
Yeah. And the last question I have to ask is, where do you live, and do you want to relocate, and do you want a job?
He doesn't want a job.
He might want
I
something
have
to do.
3 years left. I've got 3 years left before I hit my military retirement. And right now I'm in SoCal. So I don't know where I want to move after this.
Awesome.
But Tennessee's beautiful. Just want to point that out.
Tennessee is beautiful, and it's on my list due to the tax benefits.
Well, you
and whatnot,
wanted to give him a job. I wanted to ask him how I can develop a voice like his. That's what I.
So, Luis, what aircraft did you fly for the Air Force in SoCal?
I fly the King Air,
Oh,
Out of
interesting.
where?
Edwards.
Oh, I guess Edwards is SoCal. I never thought about that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I'm thinking San Diego, LA. That's kind
It's
of
really
high
Mezcal
desert.
or
That's the high
something.
desert.
It depends on who you ask.
That's very
So
cool.
I'm stationed at Edwards Air Force Base, flying C-12s out of there.
So you're going to keep
before
your
that, I
Bonanza
flew
in
Learjets.
Rosamond. Yeah, or Cal City,
Yep.
I guess.
Mhm.
Very cool.
I used to fly Learjets in Ramstein and C-130s at Little Rock. So a little bit of
Good
everything.
transition to a charter
Yeah.
pilot or corporate pilot career with no problem.
So what
Okay.
you want to do next, right after this call, is call up whichever airport you want to go to and get on their hangar list.
Yeah.
That'll
I had-
probably take 3 years to get.
Yeah.
Yes. So my local airport, I was going to buy an airplane here. Bonanza had a contract ready to go. Thanks to Savvy Aviation. Thanks for the contract, Mike. Those are great. Then as soon as I was going to close on it, the one paragraph that says, "Hey, I give you this airplane free of all liens and clear title," and that's when the owner said, "Hey, actually, there's some problems," and I'm like, "Well, I can't buy it."
No.
Yeah.
Really?
But I was going to take his airplane and the hangar, so I was all set up.
Yeah.
Wow.
Oh,
Way to
that would
do
have
it.
been great.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you
Yeah.
could work something out where you could pay off his lien or something. I'm sure you'd looked at that. Yeah, that's a shame.
No, it's gone. But now I got to fly. I fell in love with the airframe, and I know what I want and what I don't want. So now I'm very picky and choosy on what I see in on Trader Plane or the other websites.
Well, you have 3 years to figure it out.
I do.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, cool.
Yeah. Great question, Lewis.
So
Yeah.
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay. We love talking about anything that's going to bring more mechanics into
That's
the
right.
world or back.
I'm working on it.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Our next question is from Jeff, who is trying to solve his engine's demons. Are we doing an exorcism here, or what's up?
Yeah, I hope so. I've lived with this issue ever since I finished it. It's the PZL Franklin engine, a 4-cylinder, the 235 variant that I have on my home-built Pulver Junior Ace. And ever since I run that thing from brand new in 2000, it's never run up to its static RPM of 2,800 advertised. I can't get it over usually 2,100 on takeoff. And at any more throttle than that, it just falters and kills the engine. The engine dies. But as soon as you back off on the throttle, it resumes power at that about 2,100 level. Now, it's supposedly 125 horse engine. The Pulver Junior Race will fly on 85. So I basically just have derated the engine and never pushed it beyond the 2,100 and have a lot of fun with it. I have 390 hours on it now. I talked to a lot of PCL experts and I got a lot of theories and I've tried a lot of them. Mostly it was I changed carburetors. Yeah, there's a nice little. That's a Corbin Junior Ace.
Oh,
Mine's a Hober.
sorry.
They're very similar. I tried an 0290 carburetor on it. Same issues, exact same issues. It just falters at 2100, 2150 or so. I changed props 3 times. I'm currently running a 7644 Cincinnati wooden prop. It gave me another 150 RPM from my previous 46-inch pitch, but that should be, I guess that's what you're supposed to get anyway when you reduce the pitch. And so I've narrowed it down to either my homemade exhaust has created too much back pressure at the higher RPM, or there's been some rumors that PZL didn't carefully mark their camshafts gears, and that when they assembled the engine, they made them 1 tooth off in the markings, and so the internal timing might be off. And I was wondering, is there a way for me to determine, is that whether or not it's an induction problem or an ignition problem or a breathing problem with the engine, or is it just internally timed wrong? What do you guys think?
Well, let me ask a question first, because
Sure.
I have a wonderful feeling that Colleen has done some good research and study, but just from a mechanic standpoint, I just want to understand, because I don't know anything about Franklin engines, so I haven't ever worked on one. It's an engine, I get it, but you're saying that the advertised static RPM should make it to 2,800. Is that also the red line of the engine?
Yes.
Yeah.
And so, but
From the literature I've read, yeah.
okay, so in my little mechanic brain, doing ground run-ups on Cessna 150s and Cherokees and that sort of thing, you'll have a 2,700 RPM red line, but static RPM, at best, you're going to get like 2,300, just because you're not unloading the prop going forward. In flight, you can get the 2,700 because you're pulling the airplane forward. So that really struck me, that you actually anticipate getting 2,800 on a static run, which makes me think you're going to go way past that in flight at full power.
And he doesn't.
And you don't. So you're not
Stalls. It dies.
Yeah. So
No, even in level flight, I can't push it. I can sneak it up to about 2,300, and that's it. Yeah. Then again, it falters.
Why
But
would it
yeah,
falter?
Well, I don't know.
One thing that kind of bothered me when I was reading this over was that you've got the thing, the time ignition timing set to 32 degrees.
Yeah,
before
that's
it topped
crazy.
That
Yeah.
That's
That's
incredibly
But
aggressive.
that's per the manufacturer.
That's
I knew
correct. That's
Colleen
the
would know.
manufacturers.
I looked it up. It is. I've never heard of 32, but that's what they say
Right.
on slick.
Yeah, I always thought too, but because it was a manufactured call out, I didn't want to mess with that and have some detonation and ruin the thing.
I would back it off.
No, that'd be the exact opposite. You know, if
You might just run cooler.
The more advanced the timing, the less the detonation margin.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would, just as an experiment, I would want to reduce
Set
that
it to
timing.
25 or something. and
Yeah,
see
set
what
it to
happens.
25, something perfectly reasonable, and see what you get.
Is there somebody at Franklin that you could talk to? Is there?
Well, unfortunately, PCL was bought out by Allison about 2009 or so, and for their turbine line. And so there's been just parts available. A couple of the engineers that worked at PCL bought up all the parts supply, and they have a pseudo business with a couple of dealers in the States. Southern Aero is the only one that I really know of that's still existing today. Mine was brought into the country by a private enterprise, but the price was so good I couldn't refuse.
Yeah,
so there's very little data.
There is a Franklin engine company now, right? That inherited the type certificate for those engines.
Not to my knowledge. It's been a couple of times. It's been rumored that they were going to start it up, that somebody else had bought the type certificate, but that didn't come to fruition.
So who overhauls these engines?
Well, I know there's a
well,
shop in the Southeast someplace that specializes.
yes, that's the Southern Aero guys. I think they're in North Carolina. And I've talked to them quite a bit. And they have some experience, but their solution was to change the carburetor out or to put a throttle body on it, that it just wasn't breathing well. PZL changed the induction system on the traditional Franklin engine that was U.S. produced, and from a manifold situation on the sides of the cylinders and the carburetor mounted in the back of the engine, they went to a Continental style spider and a low slung carburetor. And some people have said, yeah, the thing never has breathed properly because of that. But others say, yeah, there's no issue. But there's so few of these engines around, and I haven't been able to find anybody who's willing to share or have overcome this particular situation.
So others that have this engine have similar problems?
There has been, when you talk to Southern Aero guys and a few online situations, there have been. And the last one I read was that they had to change the internal timing, one tooth on the cam gear.
Oh.
It was not set right. And so they also did some research, and they gave me a timing of 104 degrees on the intake center line with the valve opened at 0.336 inches.
And have you checked that yet?
I have not, because that's I just found that out. I'm a snowbird down here in Florida, and I haven't had access to my hangar, but I will in April.
Yeah, I would want to check that. I would want to check the mag timing. If you find the cam timing is correct, then boy, 30-something degrees
try
advanced
backing off the
timing.
mag timing and see what if that helps.
I would do that. And your experimental built exhaust system, I can't see where that would cause the engine to get to a certain RPM and just totally choke.
Yeah.
I can see where it would slowly become, it just wouldn't make power. But nevertheless, you have to have good flow. You could just put some straight pipes on it and just to see what it does on ground runs. That'd be easy enough. You could just take the exhaust off, but that's kind of harsh. It's really loud too.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's kind of where I was headed, but I was wondering if you've seen anything like that.
You think you could just do a test run with the exhaust off and the cowlings taken off, or
that's what I was.
Oh, sure, I could.
Yeah.
Would it burn ignition wires and stuff for that? Coming out there.
No, I could arrange for that. I was just more worried about warping a valve, exhaust valve, or something from the lack of a shield.
No, that wouldn't affect the exhaust valves at all.
No, they don't know. And you're not going to run it long enough. You're just going to fire it up, get it warmed up, go to full throttle, see if it makes a difference, and back it off.
Yeah.
Where are your headphones?
You said the fuel cells are in the wing roots of this aircraft. That's what you
correct.
wrote.
And I do run a boost pump.
Oh, you do? Okay. I was wondering if you had adequate fuel pressure, but that sounds like should be plenty for.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I tried was maybe I'm not keeping the right head of fuel in the carburetor, but.
It's a high wing airplane, right? So
so it's got head.
Yeah.
So it would probably have enough head pressure just from gravity feed.
Yeah, it seems to run just as well with or without the boost. I just use it on takeoff and landings.
Well, I think you've got a couple of good things to go try. Cam timing, mag timing, and exhaust. Those are three good ones.
Yeah.
Well, all right. I appreciate it so much. Thank you for your time.
Troubleshooting is always like that. It's a process of elimination. You make a list of all the things that could be wrong, and then you just one by one rule them in or rule them out.
Yeah, without changing expensive parts.
But at least you can still fly in the
and without changing more than one thing at a time.
Luckily, it's installed on an airplane that doesn't need all that power. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, if this was a certificated aircraft, it would be unairworthy.
Yeah, right, because it's not rated power.
That's the beauty of experimental, isn't it?
Experimental aircraft, the airworthy is not a defined word for experimental aircraft.
Correct.
I do want to. Mike made a comment almost in passing, but it is really important to troubleshooting one change at a time.
Yeah, yeah.
Don't do 2 or 3 things, because if you get a different result that
You
isn't
won't
a
know
fix,
which. Yeah.
you won't have any clue. And so then you have to put it all back and start again.
Right.
One change
good
at
point.
a time.
Good point.
Yep.
Roger that.
All right.
Well, all right. And Mike, I enjoyed your book very much, Manifesto. Appreciate that
got more.
endeavor.
He's got more. Keep going.
Yeah, I noticed that now. I was looking it up.
Yeah.
Well, Jeff,
Okay,
appreciate,
guys. Well, thanks very much.
yeah, appreciate the call. Let us know how the exorcism goes.
Yeah.
Right. Boy, if this works, I'd be so happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That, yeah.
I think you're on the right track.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, guys.
We'll see
Thanks
you.
very much.
Our next question is from Josh, who is wondering if we're too eager to get rid of leaded fuel. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, good morning. So I've been curious in all the reading I've been doing about the transition to unleaded avgas. There's been no mention at all about some of the benefits of lead. The big one, of course, being that it boosts octane. But the other one that I've heard ever since I started flying was in relation to as a lubricant for your valves, which has always sounded a little strange to me, knowing all the troubles that lead causes for valves. And so I wanted to get your guys' take on that. And as I said, that's not something that I've heard discussed at all.
What a timely question.
One man's lubricant is another man's deposit.
As it happened, I wrote a recent one of my columns for AOPA Pilot on this subject. It is kind of interesting. The most that's known about this actually comes from automotive situation where back in the 1970s, the EPA basically banned leaded MoGas, and all of the cars had to switch over to unleaded fuel. And cars that were built in the early 60s and earlier than that had a problem with unleaded fuel. Whereas cars that were built in the 70s and after didn't have a problem. And the difference was that the later model cars had valve seat inserts that were hardened, whereas the earlier cars either had unhardened valve seat inserts or didn't have valve seat inserts at all and actually had the valve seat simply machined into the cylinder head casting. And the problem is, the problem was that when the valve closes into the seat, the two surfaces can have what's called micro welding. And then when the valve opens or when it rotates, it breaks the micro welds and a little piece of material comes off. And repeat that thousands and thousands of times, and you wind up getting what's called recession of the valve seat. So to prevent recession of the valve seat, there are two different things that you can do. One is you can insert some sort of chemical that inhibits the micro welding, and there's some pretty good evidence that tetraethyl lead is effective at reducing micro welding. And the other is that you can make the seat out of hardened material that isn't susceptible to the micro welding. So when we look at aircraft engines, Lycoming switched to hardened valve seats quite a long time ago, back in the 90s. Continental didn't switch to hardened valve seats until much more recently, early 2000s. So there's a possibility that older cylinders that don't have hardened seats, and that would almost all be Continental cylinders because presumably all the Lycoming cylinders that didn't have hardened seats are long gone by now. It's possible that some of the older Continental cylinders would have problems with valve seat recession. Presumably, the newer ones don't. We're involved. When I say we, my company Savvy is involved with AOPA in this experiment that they're doing with what they call the two fuels, one airplane Baron that they are now operating with 100 low lead in the right tank and G100 UL unleaded, the unleaded gammy fuel in the left tank. And the airplane is being surveilled very, very closely with frequent borescope imaging and oil analysis. And one of the things that we're doing, and Paul was heavily involved in this, is accurately measuring valve seat recession in order to determine whether there's any greater recession on the side using the unleaded gammy fuel than there is on the side that's using the leaded avgas. And Paul actually engineered a special measuring appliance. And we did the baseline measurements just the other day, a few days ago, where we're actually measuring exactly how high up the valve stem extends out of the cylinder head to the nearest thousandths or half a thousandths. Actually,
half a thousandth, yeah.
The nearest half thousandth of an inch. It's a very, very accurate measurement. And we're going to be repeating this procedure every few hundred hours to determine whether there's any increase in valve seat recession using the G100 UL. Theoretically, those cylinders, because the engines were overhauled fairly recently, I think the cylinders on those engines are Superior Millennium.
Superiors.
I think they're not Continental cylinders. I think they're Superior Millenniums. But at any rate, we'll see how that works out over time, and we're measuring it very, very accurately.
The Superior engine, I assume, has hardened valve seats.
Though we assume that. I guess we're going to find out. Huh?
We're going to find out.
And it's also kind of interesting that this micro welding problem where the valve is pressing up against the seat. The amount of micro welding is determined by two different factors. One factor is how quickly the valve closes against the seat, kind of the impact forces, and the second is how let's say firmly the valve is being held against the seat during the peak pressure portion of the combustion event. In automotive engines, the impact is probably the dominant factor, because those are very high revving engines and the valves open and close very rapidly. In aircraft engines, the valves open and close very slowly because they're very slow turning engines. And so the predominant, and the valves are much bigger. So the predominant factor for aircraft engines is the how firmly the valve is being held against the seat by combustion forces. And, I did a back of the envelope calculation on exactly what those forces are, because the peak pressure in a cylinder is typically something like 800 PSI, and the exhaust valve has a surface area of roughly 1 square inch. So there's 800 psi force on the valve, then you calculate what the contact area is of the valve to the seat, and that might be maybe a tenth of a square inch or something on that order, and so the force that holding the valve against the seat, would be something on the order of 10,000 psi or something, which is really pretty modest. I mean, the compression strength of any steel is considerably greater than that, and so, at any rate, it doesn't. The seat doesn't have to be terribly hard in order to be able to sustain those kinds of the forces that the valve is pressing against the seat. But anyway, we're doing these very accurate measurements with the AOPA two fuels Baron, and we'll have some definitive information about whether it's going to be a problem. I know the FAA did a 150-hour side-by-side test some years ago involving a couple of Lycoming 0320s, where they were running one on 100 low lead and the other one on one of the 100 octane unleaded PAFI candidate fuels. And they were measuring valve recession very accurately in the 0320 and found no increase whatsoever in valve seat recession during that 150-hour test.
So some of the, I've heard the thing about lead being a lubricant for a long time. Back in the day, my dad was a mechanical engineer for Phillips 66, like way back in the day in the 50s. And he calculated octane ratings, one of his jobs, and, how much lead to put in the fuel to get the proper response. And I remember way back when asking him questions about that. And what I heard from him, that I've also heard from several other, sometimes attendees in some of my classes that happen to be in this business, that the primary function of the lead is to control the speed of the flame front as a detonation issue. But in none of those conversations ever did anyone ever say anything about lubrication. And I've yet to be able to find someone that can tell me, and maybe it's out there, but I just have not heard anyone that knows, the people that are involved in that industry explain how and why we ever started talking about lead as a lubricant.
Well, it's a misnomer. I mean, I think what Mike is saying, it's a cushioning thing or it reduces this micro welding, and people don't know what micro welding is, but they understand lubrication, so they're using that word.
Yeah, I mean, I see that, but how did we ever get, I don't know. And I've heard it from some very knowledgeable people, not specifically knowledgeable to engine combustion events and that sort of thing, but they repeat, oh yeah, you got to have it for lubrication. And I'm struggling to see how that ever got started.
All I can say is I just removed the prop from my Lancer, and the sludge in the crankshaft, the hollow crankshaft was, that's not
eighth of an inch at
that
least.
I want in my engine. It looks like
centrifuge is the lead.
Well, just look at it as a oil separator. It separates the heavy parts from the light parts, so it's like a filter. It's great.
Yeah.
You just need to pull the prop off.
My prop from operating properly. I mean, it's ugly, and I don't even want to touch it. It's so ugly.
I've seen a couple of the preliminary borescope images from the AOPA Baron, and those cylinders haven't run very long yet, but already the difference that you can see in the borescope images is very dramatic. The engine running on G100 UL, everything is just clean as a whistle in there, and the one running 100 low. And of course, these are two engines that are running literally side by side identically. Everything about their operation is totally identical. So it's really a wonderful test.
Wait, are they running lean a peak or rich a peak?
Sorry. I think that they're running lean of peak now. I think they weren't during the break-in period, but I think they're running lean of peak now.
That'll help.
And at
Yeah.
the moment, they're running Aeroshell 80W. The airplane is in Ada, Oklahoma, and it's apparently cold.
Oh.
So they're
Yes.
running Aeroshell 80W. And I asked whether they were running CamGuard, and they're not running CamGuard yet.
As frequently as they're flying the airplane,
Yeah.
I think it might be nice to not have the cam guard just to keep it out of the equation for whatever the results are.
Interesting.
Anyway,
Well, it's not as cold as Alaska. Going back to Josh.
yeah. Oh, that's right. Josh
He's
is on the
guy
call.
that asked the question. Yeah, but I think the bottom line is it's not an old wives' tale, Josh. It's actually true, but the word lubricant is a little bit of a stretch. It's more of a chemical protectant for the valves.
Yeah. And
That's the benefit.
again, we don't think it should be a problem in cylinders that have hardened valve seat inserts, but we're putting that to the test right now.
Yeah.
There have been some testing that has been done, particularly with Lycomings. This is probably the first really scientifically done test involving Continentals.
Cool. And Paul, when
Yeah.
can we get one of your valve recession measuring
You don't
devices?
really want one.
Does it involve laser beams?
Yeah. So I was, it's not a complicated tool, and a machinist guy that machines aircraft tools and things actually did the bulk of the machining for me. He had one of those really cool scanning deals. So he scanned the top of a cylinder, and I was making it out of a plastic chunk as a test. Anyway, so we got a nice unit, had to do some modifications to make it work. But the concept is real simple. And then, so we're thinking about, well, let's make this tool because people are going to want to buy this tool. And then it occurred to me, when have I ever measured the height of a valve stem on a running, an engine that's been in service? Because it's all relative. And whenever you grind the seat and grind the valves, it'll change the height. So every engine is going to be just slightly unique.
Well, and each
may
of the
not be
cylinders measured differently.
Each of the cylinders
There's
measured
no-
different in our
We're
test.
not interested in what, as you said, what the absolute measurement is. We're
Right.
interested in whether it changes over
The
time
change,
and
yeah.
how much it changes over time.
Yeah. So
That's why we have hydraulic lifters, right? They accommodate
Right.
all different.
So the most valuable would be when you install a brand new engine, measure all the valve heights. And then sometime later, if it's interesting, measure them again, 500 hours, 1,000 hours, whatever. And even then, I'm not sure what the data is going to tell you for an in-operation engine. So I wouldn't say I scrapped the idea of
It's not
building
a
another
moneymaker
tool.
for you, is what you're saying.
Yeah. Well, and I don't know that it has a whole lot of value other than, oh, gee, isn't it cool that we can do this? So,
Okay.
But sorry, Colleen, the tool that Paul put together is not going to fit your light combing. We have to
No, that's
do
true.
a whole different tool for the light combing.
it's very specific to the 470 520.
It would be
Sorry.
a different tool yet for angle valve and straight valve.
Oh, okay. Oh, the way it fits and bolts on.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it bolts onto the cylinder head, basically where the
Screw holes are for the rocker cover.
the rocker cover
Yeah.
bolts, but then it has some very precisely aligned holes that are on the extended axis of the valve stem that you put the micrometer device through to measure, and those have to be lined up perfectly with
I'll
the
just use
with the
duct
valves.
tape and wooden blocks
Yep. Sure. Works great.
and an inch ruler.
T-LAR. That'll be fine.
T-LAR, yeah. Okay. Well, on that note, we're going to put a bow on this episode. Hopefully, we got a few things right. Let us know what you think. Keep sending us your tricky questions. We look forward to hearing from you. You can always email us at podcasts@aopa.org.
See ya.
Bye-bye, everybody.